Well, we're back, and we are back for a brand new book on our midweek Bible studies. We find ourselves at the book of Matthew, the first book in our New Testament. And let's just hit a few things with Matthew before we go too far. The number one issue that Matthew wants, or theme, that he wants to push is that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. He is the King of the Jews that was promised to the Jews. And therefore, he is the Lord of all things, the head of the church. It is a very Jewish book. It is aimed at the Jews to help them understand. But it also helps us in so many ways, because to be a Christian divorced from all of our Jewish roots is really weak tea. It's not a very powerful thing. You need to realize that other 1,500 years of the community of faith and how God spoke with them, how he worked with them, how he molded them, how he corrected them, how he sifted them and then regathered them. All of these things are super important. Their holidays, the commandments, their poetry, their songs. If you don't read him, I would suggest that you find Bobby Valentine on Facebook. He posts long form there. He also posts a lot on Facebook on the Restoration Forum. Just search for Bobby Valentine and you'll find that. He really has a gift of scholarship and bringing the Jewishness of the Christian faith into it and the importance of the Old Testament. He also has a blog. I don't know how often he writes on that. It is stoned, as in past tense, stonedcampbell.blogspot.com. But you'll really enjoy him. That said, I always can remember the read through the Bible in a year programs. Did you have those at your church, or do you do that with an app? Most of the time it was read through the New Testament, but every now and then it was read through the Bible. When it was read through the New Testament in particular, as a young boy, I was all in, because I was then, and I still am today, an avid reader, just voracious reader. A couple of books a week I've probably averaged since I was 12. And before then, was reading as many as I could. I always got as many books out of the library as they would let me take. And I'd be back a day or two later, and they'd just look at me, I'm ready, right? But then I'd start reading, all right, New Testament, story of Jesus, very cool stuff. And a whole lot of names that aren't fun to read. Now, this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Why would Matthew start this way? Well, to a Gentile mind in the 1960s, where I would have been a young boy reading this, or to you in 2024, or whenever you stumble upon this video. That's not a way to start the book. But to a Jew who's been prepared for the Messiah for 1,500 years, this makes all the sense in the world, and there's no reason to read the book unless you see the credentials of Jesus Christ. And so that's what Matthew is starting with, is to establish his credentials. Here is the reason why this story is important. And as soon as you say the word son of David or the word son of Abraham, everybody in that prepared group, that community of faith, everybody pays attention, because everybody knows the Messiah must be through the line of Abraham, but mainly, more often said, the line of David. Now, by the way, yes, there is another genealogy of Jesus in Luke. And no, it doesn't mention all the same names. Why? He was making a different point. And we'll get to that when we get to Luke. All right? If some of you have a question, a burning question about the two that can't wait, just email me at patrick@oursafeharbor.com. And I'll either answer it directly to you via email, or we'll do a special Monday morning message. Is that all right? Deal? Otherwise, let's just wait till we get to Luke, which will be a couple books. It's going to be a while from now, but we'll get there. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Stop. We've just come upon our first speed bump our first cutaway that doesn't fit. The old Sesame Street song, I don't know if they're still doing it, one of these things is not like the other, pops into mind. Tamar is a woman. You did not put women in genealogies in the Jewish way of doing things. Sorry, ladies, it wasn't my choice. In the way we do ancestral charts, we always put the woman's name there. It's very, very important. The way they did it, they didn't. And the reason was their idea of biology. They believed that man possessed the seed for children and women were the incubator. They were the womb in which he placed his seed, and the seed then grew. There was no material added to the seed from the woman. And by the way, that was absolutely believed up until the 17 and 1800s. In the 1800s, it was finally settled when there was a big scientific meeting with a debate between the spermatist and the ovist, and I am not making those names up. Spermatist believed that everything came from the man. Ovist believed that women produced an egg, which at least added something to the recipe for child. And now, of course, by the way, first one to actually write that they believed women added something to this a long time ago was Leonardo da Vinci. He noticed that if a dark-skinned person married a light-skinned person, their kids tended to be a blend. I don't know why nobody else noticed this or why they didn't write about it, but took a long time. So that's why women aren't mentioned in genealogies, is because they just grew what the guy put in them. And by the way, that's also why when couples were childless in the Old Testament, it's always the woman's fault. It's always the woman's failure. Now we know that's not true at all, that biology is incredibly complex and that male and female have a lot to do with this, and that a lot of it's beyond their control. In fact, vast amount of it is not under their control. They did not know this, so lines only went through men. And then there's Tamar. But there's another problem. Now, we have a rule at our safe harbor, is that we do not spring things on you that would make you uncomfortable with your children in the car or your children listening at home. So don't reach for the volume, because we're not going to do it now. Adults, go look at the story of Tamar. It is despicable how she was treated. She was abused in a horrific way. She was displayed in a horrific way. And she was a woman that would not have been put into genealogies if they put women in genealogies, because those things among the Jews were shameful. In very many countries in that area, but also through Asia, and sadly, through ignorant communities, even in the West. If a woman is violated, people will blame the woman. A judge recently did that out in the Pacific Northwest. The judge lost their job for it, which I do appreciate. Thank you very much, guys, and women, for rising up against that. But that often doesn't happen. Basically saying she was asking for it, she shouldn't have been out there drinking, and this young woman had been abused. So we still have these ignorant people, some of them in positions of great power as judges and politicians and in police forces. So please grow up and join the modern world, shall we? It has been illegal in America for a long time to bring a woman's sexual history into a rape trial, because it really does not apply to what happened that particular instant. But it is amazing how many prosecutors and judges allow some of that to happen anyway, even though it's clearly against the law. So Tamar, you know the story. Why would you put her here? Oh, there's a reason. Not going to tell it to you yet, because we're not done. Let's have a look. Perez, the father of Hezron. Hezron, the father of Ram. Ram, the father of Amminadab. By the way, I appreciate somebody naming their kid Ram. Much easier than Amminadab. Amminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Solomon. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. And stop. Rahab, another woman, but also another woman that the Jews would have shoved to the edge of society. Actually, they would have not allowed her in the society. If you remember the story in Joshua, Rahab ran a house of ill repute. Once again, we're aware that children may be listening, and we never want to cause uncomfortable parenting moments. That you know the story, and we can be more blunt about it if you want to be, and we'll mark it as an adults only. God told the Israelites to go destroy everybody in that town. The spies went in, a couple of them are in this house. We don't know how and why they chose this house. It smells a bit to me. That decision tree looks a bit bent. But whenever they see the soldiers are searching for them, they tell the woman that runs the place, if you hide us and lie, God will bless you. Which is, again, rather problematic for Vacation Bible School stories. I don't know what song you would make about this to teach the 4-year-olds. And hand motions are completely out of line. She does lie, and God does protect her. Wow. Well, she is then she's allowed to live by the Israelites, not with them, on the edge of the camp. Why? Because she's not an Israelite and because of her past. But the next time we see her, we only see her a couple times. She's married to a guy named Salmon, which, by the way, is pretty much the same name as Solomon. And then the next time we see her, she's in the line of Jesus, like Tamar, another thrown away woman whose reputation was shattered through no fault of her own. Rahab, we don't know. It could have been her fault. She might have been forced into this job. Who knows? But both of them are people you would leave out of your history if you were a faithful Jew. And most of us would leave them out of our stories about who we're related to, unless we're just into that kind of drama. Moving on, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. And again, what just happened here? Well, the Bible makes it very, very plain that Ruth comes from a tribe that is not allowed in the temple. In fact, God says they're not allowed in the temple till the 10th generation. At least that's what the writer of Deuteronomy says God said. But then later on, they had to marry some people from that tribe. They were forced to. God told them to do that. It's really confused. I often ask, what does God think about? And I'll name a tribe. And people who don't really read the Bible but claim it's all true, then I'll say, well, why did the rules change within chapters? Look at this. And so here's a woman from a tribe that wasn't allowed to come to the temple to the 10th generation. So her great-great-great-great-great-grandkids couldn't even go. Kind of like the infamous and horrible one-drop rule in America back, I believe, before the Civil War, absolutely. And in the after Reconstruction in the South, whenever all the progress that had been made at one time, shortly after the Civil War, there were black senators, congressmen, they were in high positions, and then the racists of the North came down and destroyed all of that and joined with the racists of the South. A horrible thing. And then President Wilson took it to the nth degree and kicked blacks out of every important office in government. It was a horrible thing. But during that time, there was a one-drop rule. If you had one drop of black blood in you, you were called black, period. You'd have 99% white, didn't matter. And that's horrible. That law about this whole tribe, not until the 10th generation, that's horrible too. And so once again, we have to ask ourselves, did people say God said that, or did he say it? Well, shortly after they said God said this, God brings the story of Ruth in. She comes in, she marries an Israelite, and she is Jesus's grandmama, just like she is David's grandmother, as is Rahab, as is Tamar. Why is God putting these names? Because there were a lot of sweet women. There are a lot of nice women who stayed home, did sweet things all their life. He could have mentioned them. No, he didn't. And that means a point is being made. And we're going to have to look for the point. But I'll tell you as soon as we hit the bottom of this page, all right? Maybe. We're going to get there. Probably today. We got a lot of other big names. Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of David. So again, establishing Tamar, Rahab, Ruth. All these people that you would not mention, he's talking about to his fellow Jews. And that are very problematic when it comes to why were they allowed to be in the community? Not Tamar. Tamar's an exception. She was in the community. Why is she in the line of David? Well, he goes further. There are no surprises in the rest of it. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, and then just the guys. And the guys go on down all the way up to the exile, and then verses 12 and forward, it's guy, down to verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah, the anointed one. Anointed. Well, we look upon that as he is, called out by God to be our Messiah. And we're absolutely right. But kings were also anointed, like David. And he's in the royal line, solidly in the royal line, with 3 thrown away women of ill repute, once again, that they did not deserve. 4, Mary. We often skip this. We move right on. We've seen the beatific pictures of Mary. We see her holding the dying Christ, La Pieta. We see her as a Madonna, as holding the newborn Christ. There are some depictions of her crying near the cross, which she absolutely did. But the pictures don't really hit what her life was like. She was right in there with Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth. Did you know that? Well, let's look at the story. First of all, he has to do the wrap up. There were 14 generations in all, from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile and to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. Is that precisely true? No, but they didn't write things like that. They didn't write it like Westerners did. You're just going to have to get over it. They did not count like we counted. They didn't rely upon numbers like we do. Or you're going to have to believe that everything happened in suspiciously round numbers in the Bible, and many of them happened with the same number of suspiciously round numbers. No, they used numbers to illustrate a point. There's a balance, a plan. God had intention. None of this was out of line. God was headed somewhere with the birth of Jesus through these 4 women and their line. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. Notice how he keeps pushing that, the Messiah. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit. Because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. Joseph was faithful to the law. Well, there's a word for that. Other versions will say Joseph was a righteous man. Sadiq. And in fact, the nation of Israel will still call somebody officially Sadiq. For example, whenever somebody would save people during the Holocaust, it didn't matter if they were an unbeliever who was a scoundrel. If they saved people of Israel and they took great risk and such, many of them have been called Sadiq, and a memorial put there as a righteous man. And we all know Steven Spielberg movie about this. There are others as well. Being Sadiq, he had every right to break the betrothal. And his fiancée is pregnant. He had every right to shame her publicly. That would be easier on him than to marry her and raise the child anyway, or to try just to put her away privately. You know this. If you've seen it somewhere in your life. Somebody's been engaged. The wedding's being planned. You get up close to the wedding, canceled. Nobody's talking about why. And then the rumors start. Then the uncomfortableness sets in. He was willing to go through that, not to shame her publicly, not to put her in the Tamar, Rahab, Ruth categories, I guess, although they aren't exactly the same. The results would be the same. Why would this be a shame? For most of our Christian history, we wouldn't have had to answer that question. But we don't teach our kids sexuality and morals like we used to. Some of that's good, because we used to be so harsh and so mean that it kind of drove kids to sex. There's got to be an open and honest and using the right names for body parts. And we've had Liz Hunt talk to us a couple times about that. Look on Friday for Liz Hunt's talks, and some of the first ones were on this subject, and they were very well done. She's a therapist with a specialty in sexuality and a member of our Safe Harbor. We love her and love her husband, Victor. Hi, guys. We're glad you're with us. What's going to happen here? Well, if it's found out that she's pregnant and it's not Joseph's, the community is not going to accept her, even if Joseph does, and they're not going to accept Joseph either. It's going to be a stain. But after he'd considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Well, as we're about to find out as we go on through, Mary was a virgin, and the words used for Mary would place her anywhere between 12, and let's just get it out of the room now, more likely 14, 15. And that's pretty much the bubble. 14, 15, maybe 16 is pretty much the bubble if the words used for Mary are used for her the way they're used for other people. So very, very young. The Catholics tell us that Joseph was very, very old, and that Mary remained a virgin all of her life because after Jesus was born, Joseph died. Mary must have married somebody else who had children grown up, or Joseph was a widower who brought children into. I don't think you have to go through these hoops, people. Sex is not wrong. It doesn't make Mary less in any way, shape, or form. I'm aware of Catholic doctrine and how it developed. I would recommend that you might want to read it. There's a book called Vicars of Christ. There are actually a couple of books like that. Don't remember the author of this one right now, but it talks about how these doctrines were unrolled and how they had to do it because they said this, now they got to say this to back up this point. And your doctrine can sometimes run you into a room and there are no exits, and that's pretty much what happened here. There's nothing wrong with sexuality. God wrote a whole book in the Bible about it called the Song of Solomon. It is not a metaphor of Christ's love for the church. Get that out of your head. It is overtly erotic, and it is there to teach us the beauty and the wonder of erotic love between a husband and a wife, and that it is a gift to us. As the Bible said, when God made Adam and Eve, they were naked and not ashamed. Pretty neat way to phrase it. Moving on, this is not going to be easy. Mary's own children did not believe her story about Jesus. At least the sons didn't. There's evidence that the daughters might, but the sons didn't, not until after the resurrection, which is pretty much an argument clincher. If your brother, who you've always thought was illegitimate, said he isn't, and he comes from God, and you bury him, and 3 days later he shows up at the party, that's an argument that's kind of hard to push away. And so one of his brothers in particular, James, became quite the leader of the church in Jerusalem. They called him Old Camel's Knees because he prayed so much he had calluses on his knees. Isn't that cool? Well, she will give birth and he will save. You're going to give him the name Jesus because he will save his people from their sins. Jesus, actually the word Jesus is a Greek version of the Hebrew word Joshua. It's the same name, in other words, and that name means the Lord saves. But I like the fact that God chose to give the Messiah of the world the most common name in first century Israel. It absolutely was. Like, here's the Savior of the world, Bob. Here's the Savior of the world, Jim. And that's so cool. Could have used other words. God wanted to make sure we understood he really was Immanuel, God with us, part of us, which is just mind-blowing. It really is. Sit around, take some time with that this week. Verse 22, all of this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet, the virgin will conceive. By the way, the prophecy says a virgin or a young woman, but Matthew changes it up just slightly here. And before you get all excited, Paul changed up passages as well because it was considered fine to do that. We're the ones who get all precise and all ramrod about this. They didn't. They understood Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 were two stories. It didn't bother them. They understood in the Old Testament, David is said to kill Goliath, but also Elhanan was said to kill Goliath. It didn't bother them. They understood how stories work. They understood how stories are told. What we scream at and yell, contradiction, out of context, they would have just shrugged at and said, no, it's our story. And we're going, stories can't have contradictions. Yeah, they can. Why not? And especially, it really gets me. I was attacked really hard over this by a fellow, a preacher in a particular religious tribe. And he just went at me and went, stories can't have contradictions, and stories have to always make sense, and stories have to flow. So I just looked at his social media and found out he was really into Marvel movies. What? Stories can't have contradictions and things that don't happen and out of order, and really? Huh. I brought that up to him, and he didn't talk to me much more. Talked about me a lot, but not to me. So that was all right. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Immanuel, which means God with us. We just said that. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded and took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and she gave him the name Jesus. By the way, the Catholics say that verse is mistranslated, and so they say it just means he didn't consummate the marriage. The language indicates pretty plainly there was consummation, but not until after the birth of Jesus. So they say that Jesus' brothers were really his cousins, and you don't need that. It's just that and by the way, Catholics, we love you. You're going to heaven. We're going to dance with you before the throne. But the doctrines that got the Catholic Church to this place were built step by step without realizing that ladder is leaning up against a particular wall. And when you get there, your options have dried up. You're not alone in this. The tribe I was raised in did this as well with other doctrines and walled us off to the point where we said if you use a guitar playing a song, you can't go to heaven. Deal with that one. That was pretty bizarre too, but we got there step by step without realizing we were walling ourselves up in a chimney. Again, all doctrines, all arguments, all words, all attitudes are a donkey you're riding, and they're all heading somewhere. Don't climb on if you don't want to go where that donkey's going to go. Think of the consequences. So that said, let's talk about this, shall we? Luke goes into more detail about the birth because Luke evidently, well, I don't think evidently, I think there's no question, he interviews Mary at some length because there's no other way for him to know things. It talks about Mary thought this, Mary said this, Mary pondered these things in her heart. Luke knows that. Matthew doesn't. He's going to move on. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi, wise men, from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Again, parents, do not be afraid. You don't need to adjust the volume on your dial. We're not going to go into the horrors. We're going to stop here by spending a little bit of time talking about Magi from the east. Wise people from the east, almost certainly these are Persians. They may have been Zoroastrians, which is a religion which is almost extinct now, but you can still find them. I've got books on a couple of their holy books because I wanted to read what they believed. And I read them, and they were very nice, but they didn't sway me. They studied the stars. They would have known about the star that had risen. They studied Scripture because Persia, Babylon, all that area had Jews there and still had Jews there, because not all the Jews returned when Darius and Cyrus allowed that to happen. Some of them stayed, and the book of Chronicles, at least, was written there. Most likely the book of Kings had been written around there, maybe just before and then edited there. Regardless, they would have had some knowledge of the prophecies. And that put that together with their study of the stars, and that God talks to people that he doesn't have to tell us he's talked to, and these people come across. Were there three of them? No way. We say three because there were three gifts. But the gifts were gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which were particularly expensive items and precious items. You would not have made it from Persia to Bethlehem. You just wouldn't have. Excuse me, because there were robbers all along that route. You would have come in a large group, and a large enough group to where they had to check in with Herod when they entered his territory. A large enough group to where Herod would have, and he did, get very nervous at this group coming in from the east. They would have been Magi. They would have, again, Zoroastrians, most likely astrologers. Back then, astrology and astronomy were the same thing. There probably would have been quite more than three of them, and they would have had a retinue, some of whom would have been armed. So it had been a whole caravan coming in. We don't do that on Christmas because all those don't fit in the creche, all right? We're going to pull a stop here, even though we're a couple minutes early for stopping. And we're going to start with what Herod's reaction to this was and how old Jesus was when all this occurred too. Because that's an interesting thing we get wrong in our Christmas stories. But, hey, I love the Christmas stories. See, I can handle a contradiction. Of course I can. I've studied physics, so we can handle collapse of wave functions here. We can handle there's too much gravity and it's still too weak. We can handle that, right? All right, speaking of weak, we will see you next week. God bless you. Please share this with others, and let's keep talking about Jesus.